Right, Dylan. Tip number 5, please.
So with things like cold call, when you pick on a student who hasn't raised their hand, the instant reaction is don't know.
Yes.
So whenever we want to engage more of the classroom, a lot of students will say don't know. And don't know is student code for go away and leave me alone. So the question is, how are you going to react to that? And so one way, if you've asked a higher order question, one which might have different answers, you might say, okay, if you don't know, I'll come back to you. And then go around the class and get 3 or more answers from other members of the class, and then say, okay, so which one of those answers do you like best? So now, rather than having to construct an answer, they just have to select from other people's answers, but you're making them actually respond in a way to the question. Obviously, if it's a low-order question where there's only one correct answer, that strategy can't be used. But if it's a multiple-choice format, you can say to them, okay, so if you don't know which one of these 4 options is correct, are any of them definitely incorrect? Can you make the question go 50-50? Which suggests some other techniques like phone a friend or ask the audience. And so I'm very happy if the students are saying don't know, do you want to phone a friend? Do you want to ask the audience? Because the really important point here is you mustn't let don't know be the end of the conversation.
Yes.
If students think they can get rid of you by saying don't know, they will use it every single time. So if you say don't know, I'm going to keep on going. You are going to say something. Even if it's just to repeat something that somebody else has said. Don't know will never be the end of the conversation. And a tip I got from an educator called Ellen Keane in the United States, if you're really sure a student is saying don't know because they can't be bothered, then a really good technique is, yes, but if you did know, what would you say? And it's amazing how often students come up with something because they realize that they've been rumbled, that they can't be bothered to think, that they're going to have to think, but they'll come up with something. And so don't know be the end of the conversation is a really important thing. But the other way to avoid that is to not ask so many questions. So rather than asking questions, make statements. So this is the work of James Dillon, an American researcher. And what he's shown is that when teachers make statements rather than asking questions to students' responses, they tend to give longer and more thoughtful replies. So, you might do a lesson in American politics, and you say, what do Democrats believe in? And the student says, Democrats believe in progressive taxation. The teacher might then say, but most Republicans also believe in progressive taxation. So you're actually making a statement. So it could be just a kind of point back. What you just said seems to contradict what Jane just said. That hasn't been my experience, or that has been my experience. The student says, lithium, sodium, and potassium all have a single electron in the outer shell. So you're saying that the first 3 elements in group 1 all have a single electron in the outer shell. So that idea of a reflective restatement, trying to move the conversation on. And here's my hunch about why that works. When you're asked a question, you could be wrong. But you can't be wrong responding to a statement.
Yes.
And so it's just an attempt to encourage the child to say more. And so that, that's why, if you get into don't know, that's in a way, that's already the problem. And so I think one of the things that I encourage teachers to do is to think more reflectively about how you're going to get the students talking more. And what's interesting is as soon as you think about this as a conversation rather than a Q&A, then a lot more kind of moves become available. So I think what's underappreciated and very, very rarely reflect on, some teachers do it naturally, but I think it should be a focus of all our reflections, is just the power of a non-verbal signal. Or even just a hand gesture just to invite another student into the conversation. And just getting away from this, it has to be another question. Don't rely entirely on questions. Sometimes making statements can lead to longer, more thoughtful responses because, as I said, my hunch is you can't be wrong responding to a statement. You can be wrong answering a question.
It's fascinating, that, Dylan. I'm going to need to reflect about how I can make that work for maths, but I sense it could do. I don't see any reason, because maths is one of those things where I'm just question after question after question, but I can't see any reason why I can't do the statements.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. When I work with teachers, I do a workshop, and Adam Boxer reflected on this in his talk with you, that he now uses these classroom formative assessment techniques in his professional development sessions.
Yes.
And so I often ask teachers, here's 5 options that might have happened in this research study. Which one of these things do you think was the result? And I make them do finger voting, 1 for A, 2 for B. And I always say, you chose A.
Yeah, okay.
You chose B. The difference is it's very subtle,
yes,
but it can be really profound. It's just trying to get out of the habit of asking the questions that we just always ask, and it's really, really hard. I'm now much better than I used to be. So now, when I'm wearing a teacher workshop, I hardly ever ask any questions in response to something said by a participant. It's always a kind of statement, just to try to lubricate that conversation. Just making it more like a normal adult conversation rather than a Q&A session.
That's amazing. I'm going to definitely try that out, Dylan. Let me ask you one more thing on this. I've been wanting to ask you this for about 5 years, so now's the perfect time, right? Cold call. I really like the idea of cold call, but the problem I always have with it, and this came out in my conversation with Adam, and it's come out in this conversation here, I can't see the argument why, if you've got a really good question that you want to ask kids, why you wouldn't want first every child to be thinking about the answer. And I think with cold call, I don't think you can guarantee every child's thinking about the answer. I think a lot of kids kind of play a bit of a gamble and think there's 30 kids in this class, what are the chances of him asking me? And if he does, I'll start my thinking there and then. So I think that's potentially problematic. And also, if I can collect all the responses, whether it's on mini whiteboards or diagnostic questions or whatever, I can then choose which responses I discuss with the whole class, as opposed to, again, I'm doing a bit of a gamble that if I ask Dylan, what do you think? You may have the right answer, but actually there may be some really interesting wrong answers that I've not heard from the rest of the class. Right. So my long rambling thing there is, under what scenario as a teacher would you choose to cold call versus whole class assessment and collecting all responses?
Well, first of all, I think they can be combined. So I'll go into that in a minute. But sometimes a child just hasn't said something. And so, John, I'd be really interested in your reactions to what Tracy just said.
Yes.
So I just think that kind of thing, because I know you personally, I know your experiences have been different from Tracy's, so I'm valuing. So that's the sort of thing that Doug Lamoff talks about, that kind of cold call. But I'm with you, really. I think cold call is a stepping stone from asking the usual suspects to hold what I call all student response systems.
Yes.
But I think what's really interesting, I saw a lovely example of this in the English teacher in the classroom experiment, Melissa Overbury. She did a lesson on media reporting of emotionally charged events. And she chose the Heysel Stadium tragedy. And so the students read some clips about the Heysel Stadium tragedy, and then she asked the students, who was to blame? The Liverpool fans, the Juventus fans, the police, the football authorities, or the stadium authorities? So A, B, C, D, E. And they all had cards, and they held up the card they thought. She said, leave your choices showing on the desk. So then she was able to have a whole class discussion. You thought Liverpool fans were to blame. Tell us what. You thought Juventus fans were to blame. And so the teacher was able to have a much more organized discussion by bringing students into the conversation at the right time. And then, at the end of the lesson, she decided to ask the students to vote again to see if anything had changed. And this time, every student held up more than one card.
Wow.
So their views have got much more subtle and nuanced.
Yes.
And what I like about this story is you couldn't have done that with an electronic voting system because you couldn't have one right answer. And one girl, Katie, was waving all 5 cards in the air. Now, Katie is not an angel, and therefore it's entirely possible she was being silly. And the teacher said, Katie, why are you waving all 5 cards in the air? And Katie says, because everyone had some responsibility here. And so I think that idea of moving, of using these all-student response systems, not just as a way of checking on understanding, not just a way of getting retrieval practice, but as giving the teacher information about what kinds of follow-ups would be appropriate so you can bring students into the conversation at the right time. That seems to me to be a very powerful idea.
That's brilliant, Dylan.